mentioned multiple times. So I'm Elisabetta Adami, and during the pilot, I was working at the University of Pescara, and so I had my students taking part in the pilot there. And then when we applied for the Erasmus Plus funding scheme, I had in the meantime moved to the University of Leeds, so it's always me, but the needs and requirements were completely different. And I must say, when we filled in the application, I had already got the news that I would move there, but I had no idea of what my institutional requirements were. So, and as I'll explain with the example of ethics, I had to quite a few new red flags arrived when we started, when I arrived there and I started to familiarize with the UK higher education system. But then Carmen will talk even more about that, about the challenges of adapting something that was designed within a national context to an international context. The one thing I wanted to mention about the about what Sandra and Maria Grazia said earlier about my students that are native speakers. It's a native speaking country. Not all my students are native speakers of English. It's a very international composition, students population in the universities, but it's not only that. One of my, as one of the learning objectives of this project is to be able to use English for international communication, and that's a completely new learning objective altogether, also for a native speaker. And so I keep stressing that we will have teaching in my classes on English for international purposes, and I keep telling my native speakers that it's by no means any easier for a native speaker to be able to successfully communicate using English as an international language. So it is within the purposes also for native speakers. But anyway, I'll talk about ethics here and then briefly mention the third output. We realized after getting the funding that we hadn't included a key feature, we hadn't budgeted it, and we hadn't included it even in the time tabling of our project proposals. There was ethics, and I've realized that much more so after I've arrived in Leeds, and it will become clear in a minute. The issue is that we need in the project students to be our participants in the project. We need students to provide data for the project in terms of the data they provide in the baseline surveys, in their produced assignments, the digital text, their analysis, and the peer assessment, but also the any type of activity that they do on the platform, and and the evaluations, the final evaluations of the course. And thanks to the platform, again, the other new project partner here, these can all be tracked down and monitored and analyzed. And we don't want to lose this really rich and precious data. We want to be able to use students' productions as data to be able to assess the progress, to measure the validity of what we've done of the joint syllabus, but also to analyze students' productions in detail in terms of digital competence, and to make them available to other higher education institutions who may want to adopt then this syllabus, and to be able to disseminate results with other higher education institutions, but also for follow-up projects for future funding, and also for our research purposes too. Because of that, we need those issues of ethics, because we need to recruit students as participants and ask them for their consent in using their data. And in spite of the fact that as I'm sure you know, any country participating in a European Union funded project needs to abide to the common European ethics policies and practices. We've soon found out that there's a wide variation across institutions in different countries in terms of policies on ethics. So among the 5 universities, there's variation in terms of whether an ethics policy is present or absent, and where altogether in the first place, and also if there's any internal restrictions and policies and regulations for ethical approval. So I won't go into the details, but the whole process that so after, let's say, we got approved, we realized we didn't have the time, we hadn't budgeted it, and I said, I told the other partners, hold on a moment, there's ethics here. What? All right, let's try to do that. The whole process took a lot of time. So also for you, whenever you apply for the fundings, please consider ethics. Basically, what this whole process of ethics involved was, and that is actually, this is for ethics, but that's actually how we worked for all other issues in devising the joint syllabus. The first step has been to gather information on ethics policies in the different institutions, see if they were there, and if they were there, what they were, then to compare the different policies and regulations. But and we did that also for the syllabus, for the grading, for any other type of aspects in the project. And we found out, not surprisingly, that the UK, the University of Leeds, had the strictest regulation and policy on ethics, so that no research whatsoever can be undertaken if you first don't have an application to your internal ethical review committee of the university and you receive approval for that. You can't do any type of research. So once we've realized that, we filled in the Leeds ethical application, we make sure that all project partners agreed with what we had promised. We would promise Leeds we would do, so that was feasible by everybody. And then we submitted the application to Leeds. We got the approval on the 1st September. And finally, yesterday, all partners signed a declaration that we all would abide to those ethical procedures that are there. Now, just to mention the main criticalities in these ethical applications. The first one is that students are, in our case, are vulnerable subjects, are considered vulnerable subjects, even if they're not minor, even if they're fully legally entitled to give consent, because we are their teachers. And so they may feel forced. Their consent is not openly entirely voluntary unless we take some precautions, because they may feel somehow forced to give consent for their data to be used for fear that may be penalized in their final assessment and grading, because we are the teachers. So that was the first criticality we had to do, and that implied that for Leeds, you can't fill in what's called a light touch ethics approval. That's 3 pages, but you have to fill in a full ethical approval application. That's 14 pages. So the other issue, and Maria Grazia mentioned that, is that we could grant anonymization, no names, made public in students' productions, but we couldn't grant non-identification of our students. For the video chats, their faces will be there. If students want to use their profile picture on a blog, or if they want to perform in the corporate videos, we couldn't grant non-identification. The third issue is that both the international research team and the research setting, including the participants, is includes settings that are outside the UK, so it is international, and that's another further issue because you need to assure your institution that the other countries' participants in the research team and in the other settings will be able to fulfill those ethical regulations practices. The final criticality is that students may want or to recruit other people as their participants when producing the video chat or when filming them for their corporate videos, etc. And that would involve students to abide to ethical practices and recruitment and consent, and that's a bit of a Chinese box type of thing. That's a never-ending one. So these are the solutions we came up with to be able to receive approval in ethics. So the vulnerable subjects, we solve this. First of all, giving students a good amount of time from when we asked for their consent to up to when they wanted to give consent. So they have a lot of time to think through before deciding whether to give consent or not. The complete voluntary recruitment is not tied to the assessment by us, has been made possible again thanks to the platform, because we can assure students the assessment done by us will be entirely anonymous. Because of that, we assessing them will not know as teachers if they have given consent or not for the data to be used. So we can't discriminate, and so they can feel that their participation in the project is totally voluntary. Anonymization and possible identification in the consent form, we make it explicit that identification will be possible, and they need to sign that clause specifically on I give consent for my face to be used and made public. The research team and settings, what we found as a solution is that each partner has signed leads ethical policy. So we are all the international participants in the team are forced to follow leads policies, basically. And instead, for students recruiting their own participants, it would have been too much of a nightmare, and we've excluded that possibility. So students will not be able to recruit participants of their own in their productions, because we wouldn't have found a way out of that. So that's basically the ethics thing. To close with that, and all this data, as said, will be used not only to assess our students' progress and to assess the validity of the syllabus, but hopefully they will be used to come up with output 3, the final output of the third output of the project. I'll just tell you what that is, but because we will start working on it in year 3, we don't have let's say, all final ideas and details on how that will work. The basic idea is that the Common European Framework of Reference for Digital Literacies will be modeled on the Framework of Reference for Languages that the European Union has, so that it will include descriptors for each level of proficiency, from basic user, independent user, and proficient user. And we want that to include the 3 abilities: production, design, analysis, interpretation, and evaluation and assessment. So critical awareness too. But there are issues in that, and we will have to face them next year. One is that, as you may know, the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages itself has been open to a lot of criticisms and discussions, and we don't want definitely to replicate that, but to take that into account and learn from that and possibly avoid that. Not only digital literacy is also another wide area where there's been a lot of research, a lot of thinking, a lot of good practices, and we need to take into account that too. And also another issue is that our joint syllabus, the data that we come up with are based on 5 specific digital text types. And one open issue is, are these enough of a representative sample on which we can base a full development of what we can call digital literacy for international and intercultural communication? So these are the big issues. Those are the data that we have, and thanks to the platform, we will be able to draw on them. But again, I can't give you more details on that. We will be able to let you know at the end of the project, I think. So now I'll give the word to Carmen, who will explain even more challenges, but also potentials and contributions of coming from adding a new country, a new reality, and a new partner to the project from the pilot.